Hello, everyone. It's nice to see such a great crowd and some friendly faces as well. And really great to be here. There's a lot going on. And before coming here, I spoke to Luda about choosing subjects, and we debated what exactly we'll talk about, because there really is so much happening. And I mean, the diversity of issues and stories in the news is just, these days, is really insane. And we chose to focus on 3 issues, and I'm going to basically speak about them for the next about 35 minutes before we'll open it up to questions. The first issue I'm going to talk about is the election in Israel. We are having our national elections in less than a month, April 9th, 26 days from today. Dramatic. We're now in the final weeks, and a lot is happening. I'll talk a bit about that and try to go into how Israeli elections are different than US elections, how the system works, what to expect. After that, I'll talk about the Trump administration's strategy, policy in the Middle East, how it's affecting Israel, how it's affecting the region, how it could also play a role in the election as well. And the third issue I'll touch on will be the differences between working as a reporter in Israel, which is what I've done for most of my professional career, and working as a reporter in Washington, D.C., an Israeli reporter, which is what I do. Similarities, the differences. And after that, I'll be really happy to hear from you, your questions, and hopefully we'll have a great dialogue. So I'll start right away with the elections. I'm sure there are people here in the crowd who could explain to me how the Israeli electoral system works, who's going to win the election, why they're going to win the election, why everybody else has no idea and no clue. And then maybe other people who are less familiar with the system and are not really sure how it works. I'll try to give a bit of a basic explanation just so we could get everyone on the same page, and then we can go into more sophisticated discussion of the situation. The elections in Israel are completely different than elections in the United States. I could not think of 2 electoral systems that are more different. Here in the US, when you go to vote, whether you choose a presidential candidate, senator, member of Congress, a governor of your state, at the end of the day, you choose a person. You go and you choose Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. In Israel, we don't have direct election of representatives. Israelis never choose their prime minister. Maybe they think they are when they're voting, but they're not. Israelis, when they go to the polls to vote for the Knesset election, what happens in 26 days, they vote for a political party. That's it. You get to the polling place, and you go behind a curtain, and you will see in front of you many, many different ballots, each one of them having the name of a party on it. Likud, Labor Party, Meretz, Jewish Home Party, etc., etc. This election, I think we're going to have close to 40 parties that will participate in the vote. So when you stand behind the curtain, you will see 40 different ballots. And from those 40, you choose one. You put it in the envelope, and that's it. You voted. Now, how, so a lot of people are probably thinking, wait, so how do you determine who rules the country, who's the prime minister? In our Knesset, in our parliament, we have 120 seats. That's a number that never changes. And the makeup of the Knesset, those 120 seats, they get divided between the parties proportionally. Meaning, if one party receives 25% of the vote on election day, which is what Netanyahu's party, Likud, received in the last election, 25% of the vote, they're going to have 30 seats, which is what they have today. If a party receives 10% of the vote, that party will have 12 seats. And that's how you basically make up the coalition. Here in the US, another big difference, of course, you have a 2-party system. Democrats, Republicans, there are some small parties, but they usually don't play a significant role. If they play any role, it's of a spoiler, of kind of taking away votes from one of the big parties and helping the other. In Israel, it's very different. In Israel, we have a multi-party system. Today in the Knesset, don't take my word for it, but I think there are 11 or 12 parties in the Knesset today. And after the next election, we could have even more. If you take the 2 biggest parties, which is in the last election, it was Likud and Labor, together they have less than half of the seats in the Knesset. In fact, in the history of Israel, if you go back 70 years, through all the elections, there has never been an election in Israel when one party received more than half of the votes. Never. Now, in order to rule in Israel after the election, basically what happens, you need to set up a coalition. Okay, I said 120 seats. So a coalition is basically a pact or an alignment of parties that have together 61 seats, just above half. And in the history of Israel, we've never had a situation where one party received 61 seats. Not in the best days of labor under David Ben-Gurion, not in the best days of Likud under Menachem Begin. Never happened. Which means that Israeli coalitions are always made up of at least two, usually more, political parties. And if you look at the last election, you would see how complicated it is. I said the biggest party was Likud. They had 30 seats. They still need 31 in order to govern. And so they start asking smaller parties to join. And that's when a lot of smaller parties that can be sectarian parties of a specific demographic group or specific religious group actually get a lot of power, because with 7 or 8 seats in the Knesset, you can be the difference between a coalition that exists or that dissolves. And that's why a lot of times when I speak to friends in the Jewish American community, they get, it's the polite word I will use, annoyed a little bit with the power that the religious parties have in Israel. And they say, how come the religious parties, they are only 15% of the vote, but they have so much power on policy? The answer is in the explanation I just gave, because in order to govern, the big parties like Likud or Labor need to have usually an alliance with those religious parties, and that gives them a lot of power. So that's just kind of like, if you thought everything I said until now is complicated, you haven't heard nothing yet. We're just starting. That's how the system is built. And then there is one more kind of little thing that makes it interesting, which is we have an electoral threshold. Okay? In order to enter the Knesset, a party needs to receive at least 3.25% of the vote. I'm not going to mention a lot of numbers, but this is an important number, 3.25. What does that mean? If there is a party that is running for the Knesset and it receives 3% of the vote, so theoretically it should have about 2 seats in the Knesset. But no. If you receive less than 3.25, you're out. Every vote that you received goes to the trash, basically. And every election, we have many parties, it could be 20-something, that don't pass the electoral threshold, and hundreds of thousands of votes go to waste. And this is important. Why? Because a lot of times these parties will be very ideological, right-wing or left-wing parties. And the votes that they received and that are basically thrown into the trash, they, in a way, are taken from the larger right-wing and left-wing parties that could have used those votes to actually receive another seat or two in the Knesset. And so when we are trying to predict Israeli election results, which is impossible to do, and everyone fails at it all the time, but when we try to predict, a lot of times, the question you will see in the media, it will be something like, who is going to have the largest number of seats? Who will be the biggest party? That's a nice question, but it's not necessarily the important one. A more important question is, which parties will not pass the electoral threshold and waste votes? Which parties will actually take votes from the left wing or from the right wing and throw them into the trash? Because that could make a big difference between right or left having a governing coalition. So all of that combined together, those are the natural factors that you have to deal with when you talk about Israeli elections. And what's going to happen now on April 9th? Who is going to win? Who will have the majority? Again, I'm not going to predict the future. I can pretend that I have those powers. Some journalists like to do that, but actually I don't. I can tell you what we see right now in public opinion polls, and as you know from the American example, and we've had our own examples in Israel in the past, take it with a grain of salt. I think polling is important. It can reflect trends. It can give us some general ideas. I don't like when people totally discount it, but I also don't think you should rely on it too much. I think actually polls, a lot of times, more than they reflect reality, they affect reality. People look at them and it changes what they think, what they plan to do. Right now, what we're seeing in the polls is that there is a tough competition for who will be the biggest party between Likud, Netanyahu's party, and a new party called Blue and White, the colors of Israel's national flag. Blue and White is a center-right party that is led by former Chief of Staff of the Israeli military, Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, and he did an alliance with two other senior generals, former Chiefs of Staff, Gabi Ashkenazi and Moshe Alon, and with Yair Lapid, who was the leader of a centrist party, Yesh Atid. It means in Hebrew, there is a future. All of them combined together to form one party, and it's competing with Likud for who will be the biggest. And I think the polls up until now have shown that Blue and White is a bit bigger, but I think it's going to be tied very soon. We're going to see a tie between them and Likud, or at least a statistical tie. And now, after those two big parties that together, if you look at the polling, they receive, 30-something to 30-something, about, just over half combined. Then you have a whole long list of parties. I would count them at around 10 or 11 parties that receive somewhere between 3 to 10 seats. 3 to 10 is very dramatic because a party that receives, 10 seats, it will basically be the third largest in the Knesset probably, and will play an important role in the coalition negotiations. Whereas a party that in the polls today receives 3 or 4 seats is on the verge of being eliminated, right? Because remember, if you receive less than 3.25, you're out. And actually, the most interesting question in this election, and again, the media from now until election day is going to really hyperventilate over who has more, Likud or Blue and White? Who is bigger, Gantz or Netanyahu? But that's not the important question. The important question is how many parties are hovering around the 3 to 4 seats zone, which, if you enter election day with 3 to 4 or even 5, I would say, seats in the polls, you're in real danger. Because a lot of people in Israel, and this is, by the way, the dirty secret of why Israeli polling is, I won't say bad, but problematic. A huge amount of Israelis decide how to vote only on election day. Think about it for a second. Here in America, when you have a two-party system, it's much easier to make up your mind earlier, okay? There are 2 candidates, and you've seen so much and heard so much of them. By election day, who can really not make up their mind, right? I mean, seriously, if you've seen you've seen what they say, what they do, you pretty much have a lot of people have an opinion even before the candidates are announced, right? Does it have a pulse? Is it a Democrat or a Republican? Good enough for me. But let's say even the people who do actually would vote once for a Republican, once for a Democrat, and they care, and they read, and they change their mind, by election day you've seen it all. But what happens when you have, let's say 30 parties running in general, and around 12 to 15 who are around the zone of making it into a Knesset? That's really hard to make up your mind. And a lot of people actually change their voting intention on election day in Israel. I'm talking about, in some polls put it at 25% of the vote. Now, of course, it's not like they move between the far left and the far right, okay? I've never heard of someone who a day before the election wanted to vote for Meretz, the liberal party. But on election day, they woke up and said, you know what? I want to vote for the Jewish Home Party, which is the religious right wing. I mean, that doesn't happen. But you have people who can say, yesterday I thought I'm going to vote Meretz, but I see in the last election polls there's this tough competition between Netanyahu and Gantz. I want to help Gantz be bigger than Netanyahu, okay? Or you can have a situation where someone says, a few days ago I was sure I'm going to vote Likud. I was sure I'll vote for Netanyahu. But now I see in the polls that one of the small right-wing parties is barely passing the threshold. They have 4. And if they fall under the threshold, the whole right-wing bloc is going to get smaller, and the left will have a chance to rule. So I will vote for this smaller party. Okay, people change their minds according to the polls, by the way, which is kind of ridiculous, because are the polls meant to give us, to reflect reality or to impact reality? I would say they do the second thing more than the first. But if you do look at polling after all these caveats, right now I see, there is a tough competition for the biggest list between Likud and Blue and White. The right wing has a small advantage over the center-left bloc. The religious right-wing bloc is a bit bigger in the polls, but a number of right-wing parties are hovering around the 4 seats area, which means that if one of them falls, the balance will shift and the center-left will have a bigger block in the Knesset. So all of it is really hard to predict. My gut feeling would tell me that I think Netanyahu still has a better chance than Gantz to be prime minister after the election, but not, it's not set in stone. One party falls under the threshold, the whole calculation changes. So that's pretty much it. And what could still determine the vote between now and election day? I think one big event is going to be actually here in Washington. We think elections are only happening over there in Israel, but in 12 days, we're going to have, even less, 10 to 12 days, we're going to have the Aipac Conference here in Washington. Netanyahu is going to come and give a speech at the conference, and Israeli politicians, and Netanyahu has mastered this, like to use their speeches at Aipac actually as propaganda inside Israel. Because think about it for a second. He comes and he gives a speech to Aipac. He'll probably speak around 11 a.m., okay? Not exactly a primetime news hour in America, right? You're not going to have millions of people sit at 11 a.m. and watch a speech by an Israeli prime minister. But, everybody who has relatives in Israel knows the time difference. That's early evening hours in Israel. It's the beginning of the Israeli primetime newscasts. And, you have a live speech. And also, for Netanyahu, it's really important because I don't think there is anywhere today in Israel where you will have 15,000 people gather to listen to a speech by Netanyahu, or frankly, any other politician, okay? That just doesn't happen in Israel today. For most of the political parties, an event with 500, 800, 1,500 people is considered the huge success. And now it's election time. People come to listen. There are gatherings, there are events. But most politicians will tell you, if I had 500 people in the crowd, I'm happy about it. But here, there is an opportunity for a politician to speak in front of 15,000 people who are cheering and applauding, and it's on live television. You give me one politician that won't take that, okay? I mean, seriously. And Gantz decided that he's also going to come and speak at Aipac this year. He wants to show Israelis that he can also do the trick that Bibi does, talk to the Americans and talk about how great Israel is and how much we have this partnership. I think one thing that could be interesting that Gantz could try to do, he could actually try during the speech to also send a message to the American Jewish community that Netanyahu has made a political alliance with the religious parties that are responsible for a lot of the legislation that is causing fractures between Israel and the Jewish diaspora, and that if he becomes prime minister, he will change it. He will try to do a secular government with his party and maybe Likud, actually, kind of like a unity government without the religious parties. So we'll see how it's accepted. But for Netanyahu, there is another issue here which is really important, and that is a meeting with Trump in the White House. I think it's even more important than the Aipac speech, which is a nice bonus. But he's going to meet Trump in the White House, and they're going to have kind of like a very, I think, flattering conversation. They like each other, and they're actually facing very, very similar circumstances right now. Both of them are facing legal jeopardy. I think Netanyahu's is more severe than Trump's, because Netanyahu, the Attorney General of Israel, has already said that he's preparing to indict him for 3 counts of corruption, 3 different cases. And there is still one investigation going on where a number of his closest advisors are also, in danger of indictment. But if you're Donald Trump and you yesterday hear that Paul Manafort, your former campaign manager, is going to jail for 7 years, I don't think you're very happy either. So these 2 leaders have a lot in common, and I think they are going to help each other when they sit next to each other in the White House in a few weeks. They're going to sit there and really kind of support each other. I think Trump is going to say, Netanyahu, Bibi, a friend of mine, a great leader. Israelis can trust him. I'm not interfering in your election, but he's a great guy. And he's tough and he's smart. And I think Netanyahu is going to say, President Trump, you've been so great to Israel. Thank you for everything. And you are the best friend we ever had. Which I think for Trump is important, because if you look at his kind of base of support, a lot of evangelical Christians who care deeply about Israel and are committed deeply to Israel. And every time I've had a chance to speak, I write a lot about that community. I find it fascinating, and I have sources and frankly friends there. And I asked them, but how do you accept Trump's moral, what's the word, I don't know, failures, problems? And a lot of times people will say, honestly, listen, I don't like that he does this, I don't like that he says that, I'm concerned, but he's been so good to Israel. And I think that when Netanyahu and him are going to sit together in 2 weeks in the White House, this is going to be a component of the kind of conversation, I help you, you help me. We'll see how it, or as Trump likes to say, we'll see what happens, right? You know the phrase? We'll see what happens. So moving on from the election, which is, as I said, a lot of uncertainty. Moving on from the election, let's talk a bit about what we should expect after the election. It doesn't really matter who wins. The Trump administration has a plan. It's secret. Nobody has seen it. Nobody has read it. It's a plan for Middle East peace, a plan to solve the problem of the ongoing conflict between Israel and the Arab world. The person who was in charge of writing it and will be in charge of presenting it is Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. I started working here for Haaretz in early 2017. Before that, I worked for a competing news website in Israel. And after the American people decided to make Trump their president, I was contacted by Haaretz, and they asked me, would you like to go to Washington and cover the Trump administration? And I thought about it very hard for 3 minutes. And I said, are you kidding me? I mean, says, so it's not an easy thing. My wife and I, we don't have kids yet, so it's easier to do it when you don't have children yet, but still you move, we lived in a small kibbutz in Israel, an hour south of Tel Aviv, moved to Washington, D.C., crossed the ocean, cross cultural and, kind of other differences. But it's been really interesting and fun. And I remember when Trump just started being president, I was here covering it. So there was an event in Washington, D.C. with a lot of his biggest donors and supporters. And Trump was speaking, and he was happy. He just, and he's just becoming president. And at some point, there's a big crowd there, and he says, where's Jared? Jared, where are you? And he's looking around, Jared, bring Jared. And Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, the husband of Ivanka, comes to the stage. And Trump said, he's such a great kid, 37 years old, yeah. Such a great kid. And he's so smart, and he's so talented. And I'll tell you something. If he can't get peace in the Middle East, nobody can. And so, I wish my father-in-law spoke about me in such terms, really. It's just the respect, the admiration. So, but Jared Kushner has been working about this plan, and I actually think he's been working about it very seriously. They have a small team that is in charge of it in the White House. Another key player is Jason Greenblatt, who used to be Trump's lawyer. You can actually see him, glimpse at him in some episodes of The Apprentice. Like Trump is leaving the office and he's like, Jason, and they have been traveling around the Middle East a lot. I think they've had by now 15 visits to the region. They just completed another one last month. And again, as I said about the election, that I cannot predict the future, I also cannot predict, what will happen with their peace plan, but I can give you a bit of how they see it and why they believe they have bigger than a snowballs in hell chance. The situation in the Middle East is changing. And Israel still has a lot of troubles with our Palestinian neighbors in Gaza, in the West Bank. We also have, there's a big mess happening in Syria. You've probably heard about it. Situation in Lebanon, Jordan, not so stable. But there are some interesting and positive things happening. There are openings for Israel in the Arab world today that did not exist in the past. It's been a process that has been ongoing, I would say, since the 1990s, and it's been accelerated by the Arab Spring and by the civil war in Syria. A lot of Sunni Arab countries are finding themselves closer and closer to Israel because of the common enemy we have, which is Iran, the biggest Shiite power in the Muslim world. And these are countries like Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, to some degree. It's more complicated, but there are some openings with them. And this also applies to countries that already have peace agreements with Israel, Egypt and Jordan, but that there is more incentive to work together on security issues. It also touches on some even countries in northern Africa, especially Morocco, which has its own concerns about Iran and terrorism. And all of these countries have an incentive to get closer to Israel, to cooperate more than in the past, to work together. And actually the relationships are improving, but mostly below the surface. A lot of intelligence cooperation, a lot of, I will call it, indirect economic cooperation. Israeli companies will sell products to some kind of, intermediary company in Europe, and then, it goes to the Gulf area. Some cultural, but still, at the end of the day, these countries officially don't recognize Israel and don't have diplomatic relations with us. And the whole premise of the Trump administration peace plan, the Kushner peace plan, is to take those opportunities that exist with the Sunni Arab world and to realize them, to make them happen, to make these connections between Israel and the Sunni Arab world actually go out into the light. It's very difficult to do it because on the one hand, the total mess that has happened in the Middle East over the past decade, like I said, it's given these countries an incentive to get closer to Israel. All right? You see regimes and governments collapse around you. You see Iran moving into Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen. And you say, wait, I need to have someone who's strong and I can, have a partnership with and all shares my enmity to Iran. There's Israel. But on the other hand, the instability also causes many of these governments to fear for their own safety. And they say, if I get too close to Israel too fast, I could lose my own public. I could get my own public opinion against me. And actually, this is where the Palestinians can also, and they know it very well, can also play a spoiler. Because public opinion polls in the Arab world show that usually when things between Israel and the Palestinians are calm, there are no big security events, not a lot of deaths, not a lot of problems, public opinion towards, getting closer to Israel, having more cooperation, improves. When you have difficult security incidents in Gaza, in the West Bank, and especially in East Jerusalem, the eastern part of Jerusalem is majority Palestinian, Muslim population, and all the religious sensitivities that exist around Jerusalem. When you have security tensions over there, support in the Arab world for normalization with Israel goes down. So the challenge of the Trump team is how can you get Israel closer to the Arab world and do it in a way that these governments in Saudi and in Bahrain and in UAE, etc., feel comfortable to do it, that they don't feel like they are taking a risk. Now, on the other hand, there is a political challenge because the easiest way to have done it would have been to put out some kind of a peace plan that basically is, favorable to the Palestinians, and the Palestinians would accept it, and if you had a government in Israel that accepted it, then the Arab world could say kumbaya. So easy. But that's not really going to happen for two reasons. First of all, there is a huge leadership crisis on the Palestinian side right now. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, he is now 84 years old. He's been in power for almost 14 years, although he won a 4-year term and then there were no new elections. There is a split in the Palestinian political system between Hamas and Fatah. Sometimes I hear commentators on American television say we are in some kind of like a cold civil war, and I don't think the political situation here is great, but if you want to see a modern day civil war, you go to the Palestinian political system, not the American one, because actually Hamas and Fatah supporters have killed each other in recent years, and that still happens from time to time. It's a very violent split. It's an ideological split that actually resembles a lot of the splits in the wider Arab world. Fatah, the party of the Palestinian Authority, of Abbas, it's a secular nationalist party. Yes, it has religious elements in it. It's not totally secular, but at the end of the day, its ideology is that it's Palestinian national secular kind of approach. Hamas is an Islamist organization, and Hamas aligns itself with the Muslim Brotherhood, whereas Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, they align themselves with the secular nationalist governments of the Arab world, like you have in Egypt and in Tunisia. So it's the same kind of wars that you have seen in the Arab world, you have it in the Palestinian arena. it's almost impossible to see the Palestinian leadership accept a peace plan when this is the situation. On the Israeli side, not so simple either. We have a right-wing religious government right now. And as I told you, one of the challenges in our political system, the small parties a lot of times have more power than the big parties. So let's say after this election, let's imagine for a second, I'll give you my personal, kind of prediction or assessment. It could change, but I think Netanyahu will still be prime minister. And the best route for him to remain in power will be to do a coalition with the religious and right-wing parties, because they are the only ones who are willing to excuse his corruption allegations and, kind of like look away from it. So if he is in power in a religious right-wing coalition, very, very difficult for him to accept a peace plan that includes any Israeli compromises. Not because he personally would be against it. I actually think if Netanyahu operated in a vacuum, he would probably accept a peace plan even before the Trump days, kind of like less favorable to Israel. But he doesn't operate in a vacuum. He has a coalition to maintain, and he's doing it at a time of legal peril to himself. So if he goes for a religious right-wing coalition, it's very hard to make concessions on territorial and kind of symbolic issues that will be important for the Arab countries in order to accept the American peace plan. Right, because if you're the leader of Saudi Arabia or of Bahrain, what you want to do, you want to be in a situation where you can say, I accept the American peace plan, it's fair to the Palestinians. Even if the Palestinian leadership, which is corrupt and old and it's time to go, even if they don't accept it, I think this plan is fair. And look what it gives the Palestinians, A, B, C, this is what they get. But a peace plan that gives anything to the Palestinians could be very problematic for a right-wing religious coalition in Israel. So how do you square the circle? How do you get to a point where you have a plan that, forget the Palestinians for a second, because I really think their leadership is not capable right now of making these decisions. Maybe in the future, inshallah, Be'ezrat Hashem. But let's say we get to a situation where you have a peace plan that the Arab leadership outside of the Palestinian Authority can accept. How do you also make a right-wing religious Israeli government accept it? Very, very difficult. I'm not saying impossible. Politics is the art of making impossible things possible, but very difficult. So that's kind of like, on the big picture of the Middle East peace plan. I think we'll have a few more minutes to touch on the last issue I promised, which is a bit of kind of more a personal view of, being a journalist in Israel and being a journalist in Washington and how they're similar and different. So I'll give you just kind of like a few tastes of it. First of all, I consider myself very lucky. Why do I consider myself lucky? I'm an Israeli journalist right now in Trump's Washington, best story in the world, but unlike many of my American colleagues who I respect and learn from and really have only good words to say about, I don't have to cover every small excitement surrounding the Trump White House. I don't have to write about every tweet. I don't have to quote every dumb statement. I'm not saying by who. Because frankly, in the 21st century, in the world of today with the wire agencies as they operate and Twitter, it's not so important for an Israeli newspaper to have a reporter in Washington to send a breaking report that Trump tweeted that the Democrats are bad. I mean, listen, you can do that from an office in Tel Aviv, okay? Actually, you can do that from the beach in Thailand, okay? You don't need a reporter in Washington to write that Trump said something. That's not the issue here. What my job is basically to report on three main angles that are important to the readers of Haaretz, both in Israel and our readers who read the English edition in the US mostly. Three main issues. Number one is the US-Israel relationship. That's the top priority. And that includes the White House, but also the Pentagon, State Department, American military, Congress, of course, and many other aspects to it. Second thing is the broader American policy in the Middle East. When the Trump administration makes decisions that have to do with countries in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia, like Syria, like Turkey, Jordan, and I can go on and on, a lot of times those policies have implications for Israel as well. I'll just give you one example. When Trump spoke about the crisis with Saudi Arabia a few months ago, You remember that the Saudis killed the journalist and Khashoggi, and Trump was under a lot of pressure. Why is he being so soft on the Saudis? What did he say? He said they give us a lot of money, okay, which, by the way, I thought was a really interesting argument to make because, well, I mean, if you are a pro-life kind of politician, how do you say, I'm going to ignore murder for money? There is an inherent contradiction there, but that's a side issue. But the second reason he gave, it's important for Israel. It's good for Israel's security that America will have a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia because, you know, of this alignment against Iran. So this is just one small example. I can give you about you give me a country in the Middle East, we can do this challenge later. I can give you an example of how American policy with that country also implicates, involves, impacts, affects Israel. That's a priority. And the third issue, American Jewish community, which is for our readers a huge priority. The United States is home to the largest concentration of Jewish people outside of the state of Israel. And there is no alternative for Israel to the American Jewish community. There are big Jewish communities in Brazil and in Britain and in France, but nothing that is even close, not in size, not in organizational capacity, to the American Jewish community. And also not in its involvement in Israel, how much this community supports Israel and supports all kinds of different activities and projects that happen in Israel and has so many family and friendship ties. Those are two huge priorities. And I do find also these issues just to be really interesting. I enjoy writing about them. So I feel lucky that those are my areas of coverage. And a lot of times people ask me, you write about the Trump White House, they're not so good with journalists. What is your impression? They fight with the media. I think you'll be surprised. I personally have a very professional and respectful working relationship with the people that I work with in the White House. Now, of course, it's easier to do that when you write for a foreign newspaper, okay? Because most of the people I work with in the Trump administration are people who deal with foreign policy and national security, and yes, also with the media aspects of those two areas. But it's not kind of like the usual back and forth that you have between Sarah Huckabee Sanders and CNN, which, by the way, I'll tell you a little secret, is great for CNN more than it is for Sarah Huckabee Sanders, even though she might not know it. But, this kind of like glorification of the media are the martyrs fighting for freedom and for the First Amendment and all of that. I mean, so in my work with this White House specifically, it's much more professional, it's much more based just on the issues I mentioned. It's respectful most of the time. And then I've also had people ask me, isn't it kind of scary to cover an administration that is hostile to the media? And I tell them honestly, listen, my job before coming here to Washington, I covered Netanyahu for 4 years. I was diplomatic correspondent, I covered Bibi, I flew with him all over the world. I was kind of like on his tail all the time. If you graduate the Bibi school, Trump University is not such a big challenge to you as a journalist, okay? Because a lot of these kinds of, this idea of fighting the media and turning the media into like a political enemy, Trump didn't invent that, okay? And yes, an Israeli journalist, you learn about it, you learn to deal with it. The biggest threat to journalism in the Western world today, I'm not talking about tyrants like Erdogan and MBS and people, or the Iranian regime, but the biggest threat to journalism in the democratic world today, I think personally, is not Trump, it's social media. It's Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter are driving the newspapers out of business. They are taking away our advertising money. They are also making people stupider because people get used to read short, outrageous snippets of information, and then when you try to market to them a news story with all its nuance, with all its complications, they can't read it. It's long, it's got different kind of facts that maybe contradict each other. You quote one person who is for something, but then someone who is against it. What is this? Give me my outrage raw right now. So that's actually the bigger problem, and that's a problem we as reporters face in Israel and in America. And it's a huge challenge. That's why before we go to the questions, if there's one thing, I'm really happy you came to listen today, and I hope I was interesting. Is there one thing I can ask you? Subscribe to a newspaper. Print, online. It can be Haaretz if you're interested in, in the perspectives of in Israel. Thank you. But, you know, also you can try to have two maybe. You can read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal if you want to have different kind of, you know, editorial balances. But really do read newspapers because they will give you much better information than Facebook. And with that, I will conclude, and thank you so much for listening.